Sorry. Okay. I'd like to welcome everyone to the March Beyond Black History Month presentation. And I'm going to spotlight before we do that, please make sure everybody's sound is on mute, except for our speakers, because if there's any noise at your background, we'll hear it on the recording. And I'm going to ask Dr. Ray Taylor to introduce our speaker today. Dr. Taylor.
Yes, welcome to all of our wonderful Zoom people. It is my extreme pleasure to welcome a friend that it seems like I've known forever, Dr. Randall C. Morgan. Randall, as we may know, is the president and CEO of the W. Montague Cobb NMA Health Institute, which is based in Washington, D.C., which means that it affects the entire nation. The important thing about this is that in that role, he leads a staff of scholars and research specialists who focus upon the elimination of health disparities, and he'll be talking about things like this later. Randall received his BA in chemistry from Grinnell College, I'm sorry, in chemistry. He received his MD degree from Howard University, and he served as a resident in orthopedic surgery at Northwestern University and served a pediatric orthopedic fellowship at Children's Hospital in Cincinnati. Later on, Randall received an MBA degree from the University of South Florida. He is also well known for serving as the 95th president of the National Medical Association in 96 and 97. Dr. Morgan has practiced general orthopedic surgery and pediatric orthopedics in Evanston, Illinois, Gary, Indiana, and Sarasota, Florida for 47 years. And of course, I didn't know Randall when we were in high school, but Fran and I met him. I had opened my practice in Gary in oral surgery in 1970, and I believe Randall came around 1974. That means that we have been families in reality for about 50 years. In explaining why Randall is so important, not just to me, but to our community and most communities where he has lived. My friend of over 40 years, I call him the fixer, is Dr. Randall Morgan. Randall is not only a great orthopedic surgeon, but he is a great anything you need person. Wherever he lives, he inserts himself into the community. I should also say that he also starts a band wherever he is. And he helps folks in any way that he can. Whatever I needed, as I learned my way around Sarasota, Florida, Randall was there to help. I remember Howard Cosell, when he was asked about Jackie Robinson, said that Jackie Robinson was a credit to his race, the human race. We can say the same thing about our speaker for today, my friend, Dr. Randall Morgan. Randall, it's on you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Ray, Dr. Taylor, for that kind introduction. I would like to thank the ASALA of Minnesota Education Committee for inviting me to share my thoughts with you this afternoon about the latest obstacle in the distribution of fair, equitable, and timely health care for all of us in the United States of America. In my career, I've had the opportunity to work with giants in the field of medicine who have collectively worked to teach their students and care for their patients without hesitation. I lean on them now as I try to make a difference. And at this point, I will share my screen, cross my fingers, and go into presentation mode. So I think that I am good.
You're good.
I have no disclosures. I do wish to get, there we go. I have no disclosures or conflict of interest with regard to my presentation today. And my objectives are four. First, to understand the history of restricted access to education based on considerations of race. And then to demonstrate the importance of quality higher education on the road to a successful career in healthcare. To understand the need for health equity in our communities and the negative impact of the Supreme Court opinion of June 29th, 2023 on the health of our nation. And finally, to share our collective strategy to address the future through achievement of our next generation of clinicians and researchers. So as an introduction, I would say that I have thought about this topic and other earth-shattering topics and realized that there are movements or moments in history that serve as inflection points. And the point is usually a reaction to a crisis of extraordinary proportion. The crisis may be sudden or it may be gradual in its evolution. Certainly, the Supreme Court decision of June 29th, 2023 was one of those inflection points that will loom even larger in the rearview mirror. Now, the first inflection point that I missed by about 2 years was that of Pearl Harbor and the attack on the United States Naval Forces, December 7th, 1941. This, of course, has become what we remember as the day that will live in infamy. And thinking of the sudden attack on the United States naval forces, all clustered in Honolulu at Oahu, and understanding what effect it had on our nation immediately, overnight, instantly, and the world. And that the following day, the address, famous address of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a president, in which he coined the term, a date that will live in infamy. So for us who are African Americans, there were other dates, other inflection points. Brown v. the Board of Education represents just that, another inflection point that remains the starting point for any discussion on fairness and equity in education in the United States and abroad. This decision was issued by the Supreme Court May 17th, 1954. It stated essentially that separate facilities are inherently unequal. A strategic change of course in the domestic battle for equality for all citizens and the right to a quality education was the key of this decision. And it initiated the process of integration of schools across the country. Of course, the Chief Justice was Earl Warren, and those of you legal scholars understand his importance, being the Chief Justice at that point in time, as opposed to a year before, when perhaps the outcome might have been different had the case been discussed or tried at that particular point in time. Thurgood Marshall was the lead plaintiff attorney. James Nabert Jr., professor of law, professor at Howard University, and eventually president of Howard University, and attorney George E.C. Hayes of Washington, D.C., formed the legal team. The immediate impact of the Brown versus the Board of Education was immense. Through the majority opinion, which you see on the screen, I'll just read a few words. We cannot turn back the clock to 1868 when the amendment was adopted. or even to 1896 when Plessy versus Ferguson was written. This is with regard to the 14th Amendment, of course. We must consider public education in the light of its full development and its present place in American life and throughout the nation. Only in this way can it be determined if segregation in public schools deprives these plaintiffs of the equal protection of the laws. Today, education is perhaps the most important function of state and local governments. Compulsory school attendance laws and the great expenditures for education both demonstrate our recognition of this importance of education to our democratic society. So I just want to emphasize those few sentences, and let's transpose those to where we are today in Florida. And certainly Asala is showing great leadership as we try to reset what was very clearly stated by the Supreme Court in 1954. So the impact of Brown v. the Board of Education was immense. Through the Supreme Court's decision, this fueled the civil rights movement in the United States, and not just the integration of schools one by one. However, in 1955, a year following the decision, Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat in Montgomery, Alabama, sparking the Montgomery bus boycott, the prominence of Martin Luther King, and of course, eventually leading to the toppling of Jim Crow laws. The passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964 was directly related to Brown v. the Board of Education, enforced by the Justice Department. And following that, in 1965, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and the Fair Housing Act of 1968. And later we'll talk about the Medicaid Act of 1965. These were all a result of the impetus from the Brown v. the Board of Education. Facilitators and beneficiaries of civil rights movement with regard to healthcare. This is my collection of mentors, heroes, and sheroes, and personal friends who will all be recognized in the National Museum of African American History in Washington. I prepared this slide for a talk when I realized I had either been taught by, knew, or knew very well all of these individuals. Many of them are faculty members from Howard University, School of Medicine. One to my far right, Dr. Edith Mitchell, just recently passed away, was at Jefferson University, also a past president of the National Medical Association. But in the middle there's Dr. George Washington Carver. Of course, I went to college in Iowa, and he was at Iowa State, of course, as well as Tuskegee. Next to him, Dr. Montague Cobb, for whom our Cobb Institute is named. And next to him on the other side is Dr. Kamisia Corbett, who we all know for her enormous contributions with regard to the COVID vaccine. There are many, many others on this, but it shows what occurred as a result of the Brown v. the Board of Education, where all of this brilliance was on full display for all in America, and particularly for our young people. July 30th, 1965, Medicare Medicaid was established through the pen of President Lyndon Baines Johnson. And it was a health insurance program for the elderly and for those with a limited income, and certainly those physicians who practice medicine in our communities were very familiar with those patients who had a limited income. But it was focused on the elderly. And it was a result of the proposal of President Harry Truman, who back in 1945 proposed universal health insurance. And for your information, the National Medical Association was the only medical association that fully supported and continues to support universal health insurance. This is almost now 80 some years later. He also, President Truman, became the first person to be enrolled in Medicare because they actually had the signing and his enrollment in Missouri at his home. Racial integration of hospitals was a major downstream benefit of Medicare. This is something many have not been aware of. And Dr. Montague Cobb, who I mentioned, at that time was president of the National Medical Association. He was also on the board of the NAACP. He also was the editor of the Journal of the National Medical Association. And he was also my anatomy professor at Howard University at exactly the same time that he was involved in the signing of the Medicare Act. Downstream, what's called the hidden legacy of Medicare is the fact that hospitals were desegregated as a result of the Medicare-Medicaid Act, because simply hospitals could not receive funding if they continued to segregate their medical staffs, as well as to segregate patients in their hospitals and have disparate treatment and focus upon care. There were also other effects following the Brown v. the Board of Education, which included in 1976 a Supreme Court decision in Runyon v. McCrary that ruled that even private non-sectarian schools that denied admission to students based on a basis of race violated federal civil rights laws. So of course, now we're at the conundrum where everything that was based upon whether there was race or not is up for discussion, dispute, denial, because of changing the definitions of race, the importance of race. And we are going to be challenged to continue the legacy of these important acts, but that we must do. We all know that in spite of its importance with Brown v. the Board of Education, it undoubtedly had great impact, but the verdict fell short of achieving its primary mission of integrating all of the nation's public schools. There are various ways of chicanery to avoid integration, and certainly on the university level, by making it financially advantageous for students in the South to integrate schools in the North, rather than integrate those institutions like the University of Alabama and the University of Virginia and the University of Florida in the South. So today, almost 70 years after Brown v. the Board of Education, the debate continues on how to combat racial inequalities in the nation's school system, largely based on the residential patterns, of course, and the resources of schools. And then now we're beset with the same problem based on ideology and one's understanding of the importance and the reality of history. But that is beyond my scope today, but certainly not beyond the scope of ASALH. So my experience as a young physician and a participant with the National Medical Association has mirrored or worked in parallel with a number of these important events that were subsequent to the Brown v. the Board of Education and the Civil Rights Act and so forth. And one of those is the Bakke decision, as it's called. It's actually the Regents of University of California versus Bakke in 1978. And this case was against the University of California at Davis School of Medicine and its administration. It was brought by Mr. Bakke, who had been denied admission twice with prior lawsuits. But at this time, it ruled in Mr. Bakke's favor, and it ruled that a university's use of racial quotas in admissions process was unconstitutional, but that the school's use of affirmative action to accept more minority students was in certain circumstances acceptable. So that is quite an interesting summary of this that I even did not appreciate initially. But what has happened, ironically, is that the University of California of Davis School of Medicine has been one of the most successful medical schools in being successful in spite of this ruling and other challenges to enrollment in California, because it was able to define minority in different ways and had different holistic admission principles that made it possible to admit far more students to the University of California, Davis than did UCLA and University of California, San Diego, and some of the other medical schools. But this decision today is directly the ancestor of the Supreme Court decision of 2023. So there's just been continuous work to oppose any type of advancement or preference with regard to people of color and with regard to education. Then there was the Hopwood versus the state of Texas, March 18th of 1996. So this was totally on my plate as I became president of the National Medical Association the 1st of August in 1996. Cheryl Hopwood, a white applicant for the University of Texas School of Law, was denied admission despite the metrics of the LSAT scores that showed that she was superior to most of the Latino and Black applicants who were admitted. I think there were 2 or 3 out of 22 Black applicants and 3 out of 30 Latino applicants who scored higher than Cheryl Hopwood. Otherwise, she outscored all of those. And as a result, this challenged the institution's admissions policy on the equal protection grounds and prevailed. And many of the subsequent suits have been about equal protection grounds. And so I assume that means the right of the majority to have the same considerations in their applications as those of the minority. So again, a true conundrum. Then shortly thereafter, in November of 1996, came the California Proposition 209, the affirmative action initiative that again affected California now. This was 18 years after the Bakke decision. So California had adjusted to the Bakke decision until this proposition was brought. And many of you know that this proposition was brought through the work of Ward Connolly, chairman of the California Board of Regents, an African-American male born in 1939 in Louisiana. And it supported the proposition, was firmly against affirmative action. As Ward Connolly said, because it weakened Black people so that they could not and would not compete. He was considered one of the first important Black persons in California to actually oppose affirmative action for Blacks and other underrepresented minorities. And his initiatives were enacted in several other states beside California. And of course, he still lives and his philosophy still lives. And he's been able to be influential throughout the Republican Party. And there's certainly parallels to Ward Connolly and many others that we could name at this point who have stood in the way of progress for their own ancestors. So another inflection point, the Affordable Care Act, the Obamacare Act, enacted March 2010. Those who know understand how important it was that it was enacted in 2010 when there was a Democratic majority in the House and in the Senate. And it was known that it was likely to change after the next election. And so this was put through the first term of Barack Obama in a very brilliant way. And importantly, it has had a major effect on health disparities that are faced by all Americans, not just people of color. And the three goals of the act are clear. One is to make affordable health insurance available to more people. And second is to expand Medicare coverage to extend it to all adults with income at or below the 150% of the federal poverty level. And finally, to support innovative medical care delivery methods designed to lower the cost of healthcare generally. Adoption by more states would certainly lessen the health disparities that exist today, and especially in the state of Florida. This slide was dated March 23rd, 2023, almost a year ago, when the North Carolina House overwhelmingly accepted Medicaid, making it the 40th state, which means, of course, that there are 10 states that have still not accepted Medicaid. This act, if it's read closely, was so well put together and addresses so many other things besides just healthcare. It is a true descendant of Brown v. the Board of Education. So the question now is, how do we influence physician workforce in America today? Well, the AAMC, I'm showing some statistics from the AAMC, and I'm going to try to